Welcome back to a new episode of Lives on Wheels. Before telling you all about today's protagonist, we invite you to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this. For you, it's a small gesture, but for us, it is essential to continue sharing stories of individuals who have left a mark on collective memory. Today, we bring you the story of Franco Lambertini. It was a mechanical epiphany, a technical vision that took shape in the storm of the late 1960s, when the world of two-wheelers was shaken by revolutionary tremors. The year 1969 marked the end of an era for Moto Morini, left orphaned by its founder, Alfonso Morini, and the beginning of a new one, dominated by large displacement Japanese motorcycles, Honda, Kawasaki, Yamaha. The great names of the Italian industry were chasing after ever larger engine capacities, with power levels that made handlebars tremble. The small but bold Moto Morini could not afford such ambitious flights of fancy. Yet instead of bowing to the prevailing trends, it found its own course, a brilliant and unconventional path. And this is where Franco Lambertini comes into the picture. The silent leader, an engineer with the heart of a poet and the mind of a strategist. What few people know is that Franco Lambertini was not initially connected to the world of motorcycles at all, quite the opposite. His career began in the four-wheeled world when he was hired by Ferrari in June 1961 as a mechanical draftsman. The previous year, he had worked for a few months at Samp Ingranaggi in Bologna as a mechanical draftsman, and then came the dream. Ferrari was hiring designers. He attended the interview, and it went well. Considering that Lambertini was born in 1944 in the Motor Valley, we can truly appreciate how, from a young age, 17 years old, he was already breathing in the sharp metallic scent of workshops. After working on a bit of everything at Ferrari from a technical perspective, he left the company and at just 23 years old, July 1966, moved to the MWM sports car factory, becoming its chief designer. A role that undoubtedly suited him better than the somewhat monotonous position he had held at Ferrari. However, like many others, Lambertini owed a great deal to his years at Ferrari, where he undoubtedly completed his 360-degree technical training in the world of engines, also coming into contact with some of the greatest figures in the automotive and chassis engineering fields. Lambertini recalls a few names from that period: engineer Mauro Forghieri, engine specialists like Franco Rocchi and Angelo Bellet, and chassis experts such as Walter Salvarani, Giorgio Molinari, and Edmondo Casoli. MWM was working on a bold project, the Foemina, a Berlinetta with a fierce allure, powered by the Lancia Flavia's 2000 boxer engine, mounted in a rear mid position. A fabulous car designed to slice through the wind and devour asphalt, destined to compete in the Targa Florio among the racing beasts of its era. The excitement was palpable, the dream just a step away from reality. But fate, as fickle as ever in the world of racing, had its own plans. After an initial approval, Lancia reversed its decision and withdrew the availability of its engines. The project, born under glorious auspices, suddenly found itself orphaned of its mechanical heart. Not all was lost, though. With the quick thinking of those who refused to surrender, a new 2000 boxer engine was immediately designed to fill the void left by the Turin-based company. However, racing isn't just about the track. It's also fought in the boardrooms where the fate of factories is decided. Then came the final blow. Corporate struggles, unforgiving financial reports, MWM shut its doors. It was then that as the engineer walked out of the factory with his severance in hand and uncertainty clouding his gaze, fate extended a hand in the form of a providential encounter. Appearing on his path was Alf Francis, the legendary mechanic of Sterling Moss, now a manager at Serenissima Automobili. He wasn't a stranger. The two already knew each other, linked by an old Formula One gearbox issue that had been masterfully resolved. Francis wasted no time. With his keen instinct, he immediately offered Lambertini a key role, chief designer at Serenissima. It was April 1967, and as in any great story, the end of one chapter already marked the beginning of another race. From the collaboration between Alf Francis and the technical genius of Harry Mundy, a competition prototype was born, destined to etch its name in Serenissima's history. The beating heart of this machine was a powerful 90 degrees V8, featuring a 3-valve per-cylinder distribution, an engine that would set the tracks ablaze. Mundy, already the mastermind behind the legendary Jaguar Fev 12, contributed his unmistakable British touch to the project. The first draft of the engine appeared on a simple A3 sheet, an essential sketch with stroke, bore, and head type noted with minimalist precision. A mere whisper of an idea. But in Modena, then the world's capital of sports cars, an idea was all it took to ignite a spark. The excitement was relentless, and technical knowledge flowed like word of mouth between workshops and metal fabricators, where craftsmen worked tirelessly, driven only by their passion for speed. 4.5 months later, Mundi was summoned back to Modena. Expecting to find a more detailed blueprint, he was instead met with the engine already mounted on the test bench, roaring and alive. He was stunned. That V8 did not remain confined to the world of racing. In addition to powering sports prototypes, it became the heart of the Serenissima Ghia Coupe, a Berlinetta unveiled with great fanfare at the 1968 Turin Auto Show. But the fever of innovation never ceased. During the same period, another creation took shape. A revolutionary sports prototype with a wedge-shaped design and a monocoque chassis, ready to house a new 3,000cc 8-cylinder engine. The future was being drawn at full speed, with the roar of engines as its soundtrack. Serenissima was no ordinary racing team. Among its financiers were some of Ferrari's top clients, but more importantly, it became a refuge for many former Maranello engineers and technicians who had clashed with the unyielding personality of Il Drake, Enzo Ferrari. These were years of great upheaval in the world of racing, and one such shakeup led Count Giovanni Volpi di Misurata to fund the creation of ATS, Automobili Turismo e Sport, a new enterprise specifically designed to provide shelter for the discontented. First among them was engineer Carlo Citti, a brilliant and restless mind. However, the Serenissima saga was not destined to last. By the end of 1969, Lambertini decided to leave the team to be closer to his family, effectively marking the beginning of the end. Serenissima closed its doors for good in 1970, leaving behind a fascinating and rebellious chapter in motorsport history. Having honed his technical expertise in the sacred workshops of Ferrari, MWM, and Serenissima Automobili, Lambertini began looking for new opportunities. He responded to a job advertisement in Il Resto del Carlino. Moto Morini was searching for designers. The challenge was daunting. Over 50 candidates had applied. The company was looking for an internal combustion engine designer. Given the fierce competition, Lambertini knew it was pointless to merely list his past achievements. Instead, he proposed designing an engine within just 2 days, adhering to strict specifications set by the technical office, a test that would make even the bravest tremble. But Lambertini was not one to hesitate. His ingenuity and deep knowledge set him apart from the other candidates, making him the only one deemed worthy of wearing the Moto Morini badge. Moto Morini entrusted him with the role of head of design at just 26 years old. He would later become technical director in 1972. He joined the company at a pivotal moment. On June 30th, 1969, at the age of 71, Alfonso Morini passed away. His loss deeply shook the entire Morini organization. Fortunately, the reins of the company were taken up by Morini's only daughter, Gabriella, who bravely shouldered the heavy legacy left by her father. At Moto Morini, the air was thick with passion, the kind that only exists in workshops where speed is forged. The technical department, led by the skilled engineer Gino Marchesini, co-designer of the Corsorino alongside Dante Lambertini, no relation to Franco, was filled with men who lived and breathed for the brand: Arnaldo Mastrangelo, Dante Lambertini, the legendary mechanic Elio Albertazzi, and many others. Lambertini's welcome was no mere formality. It was a trial by fire, an initiation that separated the good from the great. His first assignment was the rebirth of the Corsaro Regolarita, an off-road beast that had once dominated but was now struggling against the overwhelming power of its two-stroke rivals. The challenge was clear. The Corsaro Regolarita needed more power to compete with this new generation of engines. His initial design featured a double overhead camshaft, DOHC cylinder head with 4 valves and chain-driven distribution, similar to Formula One engines of the time. However, management deemed it too complex and expensive, going against the company's philosophy. Thinking with the savvy of an automotive engineer, Lambertini proposed a more pragmatic solution, an optimized Heron head for this engine type. This cutting-edge design carved the combustion chamber directly into the piston. Combined with high turbulence intake ports, it created a beneficial swirl effect, improving combustion and delivering a significant power boost. The engine gained impressive torque and a solid 16 horsepower at the rear wheel. At just 26 years old, Lambertini had proven himself in a world that did not forgive inexperience. It was a technical triumph and the beginning of a new era. Describing the impact Lambertini had on Moto Morini is like trying to measure the wind with a ruler. Impossible. Instead, one must look at his creations, starting with the brilliant 72-degree V-twin air-cooled engine that gave soul and strength to the legendary 3.5. The year was 1970, and Moto Morini needed something new, but without falling into megalomaniac excesses. Morini was a small company and couldn't afford grandiose projects. The market demand was clear: lightweight, practical, and affordable motorcycles. No two-wheeled missiles, but something bright, honest, and efficient. This was where Lambertini stepped in. With skill and intuition, he extracted the maximum potential from minimal resources, designing an engine that was a masterpiece of balance. The engine had to be economical, no liquid cooling, but still high-performing. Enter the V72, designed with crystalline logic, a carefully chosen 72-degree angle to fit seamlessly into a nimble chassis, a compact longitudinal layout to avoid obstructing the rider, air cooling, but with offset cylinders and separate connecting rods, a radical departure from the Harley-Davidson tradition. Thanks to this setup, the cylinders were spaced 5 centimeters apart, preventing the rear cylinder from overheating, a stroke of genius in motorcycle engineering. Lambertini, a man of keen ingenuity, positioned the engine so that the rider's legs would act as deflectors, channeling fresh air toward the rear cylinder. Even the exhaust system was designed with meticulous care. Each cylinder expelled gases on the opposite side of the other, ensuring optimal cooling and maintaining a temperature difference of no more than 15 degrees between the two cylinders. A true masterpiece of engineering. The engine was ready by 1971 when Moto Morini unveiled it in preview at the Milan Motorcycle Show. But building an excellent engine wasn't enough. It was also necessary to overcome the skepticism of those who viewed innovative solutions with suspicion. Lambertini had to fight to gain acceptance for the Heron Head, a revolutionary concept with a combustion chamber carved directly into the piston crown, parallel valves, and no risk of interference. A simple yet brilliant idea that challenged tradition. Even bolder was the rubber belt-driven valve timing, a true gamble at the time. To win over the skeptics, it underwent grueling tests, running uninterrupted for over 200 hours without issues. Among the more cautious voices was Pirelli's technical director, but the real game changer was his deputy, engineer Samadi, a sharp-witted Romagnolo. With his support, the toothed belt was finally adopted. Interestingly, it was originally just a standard industrial belt, simply stamped with the Moto Morini logo. And so revolutions are born, with bold intuition and a touch of genius. Another stroke of brilliance was the raised camshaft in the crankcase, which operated the valves through unusually short push rods, reducing reciprocating mass. Simple, effective, brilliant. The gearbox featured 6 gears, the first 6-speed transmission ever fitted on a production motorcycle, an architecture still used in modern gearboxes. With the flathead design, ultra-high turbulence intake ports, 6-speed gearbox, and Ducati electronic ignition, Moto Morini found itself with an innovative power plant it could truly be proud of. Even the gearbox layout presented its own challenges. From the beginning, the crankcases had been designed for left-side shifting, but a sudden change of heart stalled everything. Longtime enthusiasts were used to the shift lever on the right, and changing its position risked alienating them. The result? Days of work and countless technical sketches ended up in the trash, and the project was mirrored to respect tradition. Thus, the 3.5 was born. Following the touring version, Moto Morini tradition called for a sport version. This was no mere adaptation, but a carefully refined evolution. In its early iterations, the sport engine featured several mechanical enhancements: a more aggressive camshaft, lighter pistons, a higher compression ratio, and optimized exhaust pipes. The Sportier riding position, with lowered handlebars, improved aerodynamics and allowed for greater speed. Even the pistons had a deeper recess compared to the touring model. To avoid production complications, Lambertini had already planned, from the design phase, standardized base models to maximize component sharing. As a result, the real differences between the variants lay primarily in the chassis. The Sport had a more compact, aerodynamic riding position, while the base model offered a more relaxed stance. The first series, with spoked wheels and drum brakes, was considered the most balanced. With the introduction of alloy wheels and disc brakes, the bike gained sturdiness but lost some of its original lightness. And then came the 350 off-road model, a versatile and responsive machine capable of tackling any terrain with surprising ease. Among the various configurations, the 250 twin-cylinder stood out, designed for the French market, combining smoothness with reliability. But the real jewel was the 501, a powerful machine with generous torque and an exhilarating power delivery. The secret behind this engine family? Modularity. The entire lineup shared the same base, a single crankcase casting that, with a simple mold modification, could accommodate a second cylinder, transforming a single cylinder into a twin. The connecting rods were identical across all displacements. The cylinder heads varied only in port shape, and the gearbox remained unchanged from the 125 up to the 501, an ingenious solution, once again showcasing the brilliance behind these projects. The only drawback? The lack of electric start. This was where a peculiar figure entered the scene. Ragionier Marchetti, a man of numbers rather than pistons, who vehemently opposed the idea, arguing that a true motorcyclist started the engine with a kickstarter, not a button. Lambertini had to concede. An electric start remained a dream left in the drawer. The birth of a masterpiece is never without its hurdles. The first 350 units encountered an unexpected issue: gearbox teeth breaking due to improper heat treatment. And that wasn't all. Soon, connecting rod bolts also began failing. The culprit? A slight mismatch in tolerance between the connecting rod and its cap, caused by a supplier failing to meet the strictest precision requirements. This imperfection led to abnormal stress that over time caused the bolts to snap. It's important to remember that, at the time, Moto Morini, like many other manufacturers, did not have an internal quality control department. This responsibility fell to the suppliers. It was a critical moment. Around 200 to 250 engines returned to the factory with failures, and identifying the root cause proved to be a daunting task. Only after an exhaustive analysis of the new components was the issue traced back to its source. Once the supplier was changed, the problem disappeared for good. Moto Morini was a small company, but one overflowing with mechanical passion. Lambertini and his team worked with absolute dedication, and once perfected, the 3.5 became an unforgettable icon, a model that left a lasting mark, born from pure passion, the kind that overcomes any technical limitation. It is said that at Moto Morini, financial management was extremely meticulous, with investments calculated down to the millimeter. When Lambertini began designing the 350 engine, he knew he had to respect budget constraints without compromising quality. In 1972, the entire industrialization process, from molds to specialized machinery, was completed at a cost of just 385 million lire. This careful approach allowed the company to maintain competitive prices and affordable spare parts, never betraying the trust of its customers. Unlike other small manufacturers struggling daily for survival, Morini always managed its accounts with discipline, paying suppliers on time and maintaining enviable financial stability. By the end of 1972, the 3.5 finally entered production, marking the beginning of a golden era for Moto Morini. But building motorcycles wasn't just a technical challenge. It also required navigating the economic realities of a company that, while boasting consistently positive financial results, was never inclined toward reckless spending. Lambertini had to learn that the best solution wasn't always the most feasible one. As a testament to Morini's frugality, Lambertini recalls a surreal episode. I had finally managed to obtain 2 prototypes for developing the new 500. One day, I saw the second prototype being loaded onto a vehicle. After a brief investigation, I discovered that it had been sold behind my back to the British importer. Furious, I confronted those responsible, the general manager and the importer. And holding back my anger, I calmly asked, "And what about spare parts? What are we going to do, considering all the components are experimental?" The sale was immediately canceled. Knew through it all, Lambertini embodied the spirit of Moto Morini perfectly: pragmatic, ingenious, and never wasteful. A man who achieved great results with limited resources, proving that true genius lies not in excess, but in the perfect balance of things. However, according to Lambertini, His true masterpiece was the 250 twin-cylinder, the refined, incomprise, misunderstood gem of the Bologna-based brand, a machine that, despite sales figures, outclassed the celebrated 3.5. The engine was a 250cc V-twin, with an over-square design, bore X-stroke 59x43.8 mm, a configuration that minimized mechanical stress and ensured lively performance. This was further enhanced by an 11.7:1 compression ratio comparable to Formula One single-seaters of the time. No surprise, given Lambertini's Ferrari background. But it wasn't just the powerful heart that made it special. The 252C was lightning fast through the corners, thanks to a lightweight and compact frame derived from the 125, with geometric proportions that made it a true scalpel on the asphalt. The only modification was an extended swing arm, which improved weight distribution and provided surgical steering precision. They called it Calamero, but the 252C was more of a black knight, overlooked in its time, now recognized as one of the finest expressions of Italian two-wheeled ingenuity. And behind this creation, discreet yet resolute, was always the same man, Franco Lambertini, the poet of mechanics. It's worth remembering that Moto Morini was always an anomaly in the Italian motorcycle industry. Despite producing motorcycles of outstanding quality, the Bologna-based company remained a small-scale manufacturer, both by choice and necessity. This artisanal scale allowed for meticulous attention to detail, but at the same time, limited financial resources hindered the rapid development of new models needed to compete on a larger scale. At its peak, Morini produced between 5,000 and 5,500 motorcycles per year, respectable numbers, but far from those of an industrial giant. Additionally, expansion beyond Italy proved to be an elusive goal. The motorcycles were highly appreciated abroad, especially in markets like the UK, Germany, France, and Spain, but the lack of a solid sales and service network restricted their reach. The problem was cyclical. Without sufficient resources, the company couldn't invest in foreign markets. Without international sales, it couldn't generate the necessary resources. A classic case of a dog chasing its own tail. It was in this context that, in 1976, Morini made a bold and visionary choice: to explore the world of forced induction applied to motorcycles. This was not a far-fetched idea. These were the years when Renault was introducing turbocharging in Formula One with astonishing results, and the concept was beginning to spread in the automotive industry, especially in the diesel segment, where it would soon become almost mandatory. Morini's intuition was clear. With a turbocharger, the company could finally enter the maxi motorcycle segment, using a well-proven mechanical base while keeping development costs under control. The project was entrusted to Franco Lambertini, who immediately got to work with his usual brilliance. A Roots-type supercharger was ruled out due to space and fuel consumption constraints. On a motorcycle, every centimeter counts. The choice fell instead on an exhaust-driven turbocharger, but the next challenge was finding the right unit. Even KKK, which would later be adopted by Ferrari in Formula One, turned out to be too large for Morini's needs. This led to a curious episode, which Lambertini always recounted with a smile. In 1977, he was informed about a small compressor displayed at an agricultural fair in Verona. It was a prototype from the Japanese company IHI, imported to Italy by a firm in Caserta. Lambertini contacted the Japanese engineers to request technical information, but their response was surprising. The turbocharger was not yet in production. Strange, he thought, given the usual Japanese discipline in keeping unapproved technologies under wraps. Beyond their cautious approach, the Japanese also displayed unusual curiosity. A series of increasingly specific questions followed. What vehicle would it be used on? How were certain thermal components designed? Why was a motorcycle manufacturer interested in a turbocharger? What type of engine would it be applied to? What valve timing and boost pressures were planned? Their almost inquisitorial attitude raised suspicions. As a precaution, some deliberately incorrect and unrelated data were provided. Better to reveal as little as possible. In a world where innovation was worth gold, competition was fought down to the smallest detail. 2 years passed without any news. Then, suddenly, Honda unveiled the CX-500 Turbo. Strangely, the bike featured an IHI turbocharger, the same engine displacement, and a V-twin layout. Coincidence? Hard to say, but one thing was certain. A few months after the CX500 Turbo's debut, IHI reached out to Morini again, announcing the availability of the requested turbocharger. The final twist came when, according to Negroni, Lambertini's trusted friend, Honda realized the errors in the specifications and had to launch an expensive recall campaign to fix the issue. Laughter erupted at Morini, a small but satisfying revenge. Meanwhile, Lambertini continued working on the Turbo project, even exploring a possible collaboration with Alfa Romeo Aveo, which ultimately did not materialize. Finally, in 1981, the Moto Morini Turbo 500 was ready. To refine the engine, Lambertini invented entirely new solutions to make turbo response more predictable. Overboost, for which he held a patent, a pneumatically controlled rotary valve, an in-house designed electronic control unit. The standard boost pressure was 0.9 atmospheres, but it could rise to 1.3 with overboost. The result? A motorcycle with blistering acceleration, effortlessly exceeding 200 kilometers per h. To test the vehicle, a top-secret trial run was organized, a high-speed ride from Bologna to Rome, with strategic refueling stops to avoid unnecessary delays. At the handlebars was Mauro Dal Fiume, who launched the Morini missile down the Autostrada del Sole, leaving behind Saab turbos, sports cars, and even a few highway patrol units. The bike arrived at its destination without the slightest issue. Presented at the Milan Motorcycle Show and the Bologna Motor Show, the Morini Turbo 500 caused a sensation. 80.5 horsepower at 8,300 revolutions per minute, a lightweight frame at just 183 kilograms, and futuristic technical solutions such as under-seat exhausts, long before they became a trend. But despite the initial enthusiasm, the project was inexplicably shelved due to the high costs of the bodywork molds, around 200 million lire. Faced with such a financial commitment, the Turbo project was halted. However, its presentation still had a significant impact. The excitement it generated briefly revitalized sales. Warehouses emptied and people once again spoke of the Morini brand with admiration. But production, now at a minimum, could no longer meet the market's challenges. Strikes, internal tensions, and the exhaustion of Gabriella Morini, the founder's daughter, marked the beginning of the end. During the 1980s, Morini found itself at a standstill, almost trapped by its own past. The company's executives were people who had endured the difficulties of the 1960s, accustomed to overanalyzing decisions to the point of exhaustion, often postponing them indefinitely. This approach led to technical stagnation, which contributed to the company's downfall. A clear example of this paralysis was the two-stroke engine dilemma. The market was pointing in a clear direction. Lightweight, aggressive motorcycles were gaining popularity among younger riders. Yet Morini chose to remain loyal to four-stroke engines, almost as a matter of principle. It was an intellectually honest decision, but one that failed to account for real market demands, an unforgivable mistake. To compensate for the lack of power, Lambertini designed an entirely new motorcycle with a 125cc four-stroke engine, supercharged with a Roots-type compressor. This project gave birth to the Tacchino, Turkey, as it was affectionately nicknamed by the experimental department's young engineers. Despite a significant power increase, the project was abandoned. Yet, inside the company, a strong team spirit still prevailed among the technicians. Heated discussions often turned into verbal battles, but mutual respect was never lost. Morini had fostered an environment where ideas could flourish, even if they were too often stifled by a management team afraid to take risks. A cardinal sin, because Morini had shown it could compete with the industry giants. But perhaps in the end, its fate was already written, to remain a brilliant outsider, an Emilian fairy tale of talent and intuition, always ahead of its time, yet never fully embraced by the larger industry. But Lambertini refused to be discouraged. If the Turbo 500 couldn't see the light of day, its concept could inspire something new. After all, he was the brilliant and visionary mind behind the legendary 3.5 and the never-born 500 Turbo. So in the spring of 1985, he went back to work. Pen, paper, and ruler, because modern CAD systems were still a futuristic luxury. And soon, sketches, calculations, and proportions began to take shape. The goal? A revolutionary engine for the motorcycle world. But behind these calculations, there was more than just engineering logic. there was something deeper, almost sentimental. A man's profound love for his company, an unbreakable bond that drove him to fight, even on financial terrain that wasn't his battlefield. To prove that funding could be found, he fought for and secured a state subsidy under Law 46. The project revolved around a chassis-integrated engine, designed to be paired with stamped steel backbone frames which served as the motorcycle's structural spine. The twin-cylinder engine came to life on the test bench in January 1986, a masterpiece of engineering precision. 67 degrees V-twin, 4-valve heads with Morse chain-driven cams, crankshaft with offset pins, 720 cc displacement, 84 mm bore X65 mm stroke, 85 horsepower at 8,500 RPM, not peanuts, liquid cooling, 6-speed gearbox, same as the 501 model, wet multi-plate clutch, hydraulic lifters. A refined piece of mechanics ready for battle. The weight? Just 53 kilograms. But the real stroke of genius was that the engine could be built using the same tooling as the 3.5, except for the 4-valve head. The price-performance ratio? 1.2 million lire for an engine capable of shaking up more prestigious and expensive rivals. In pure Morini style, solid, ingenious, and fuel-efficient. A weapon that could have won over true motorcycle enthusiasts. But fate is cruel, and the history of mechanics is not just about horsepower and cylinders. Tired of union struggles, Gabriele Morini sold the company to the Castiglioni brothers. And with that, the music changed. The 4-valve engine on the verge of glory was shelved. Ducati, however, subjected it to a brutal endurance test. 20 hours at full throttle. The result? Incredible. On the test bench, the beast ran for 20 hours straight, an insane ordeal for a prototype, almost a summary execution. It was almost excessive for an experimental engine, recalled Luciano Negroni, one of Morini's top engineers. But it ran strong, without vibrations, with robust torque, and a solid 84-plus horsepower always available. When Ducati's engineers saw the power curve, they crossed themselves. The 720 Morini delivered 10 more horsepower than their 750, and on top of that, it was designed for low-cost production. This terrified Ducati's executives. They stared at the test bench, exchanged glances, and issued the final order. Shut it down. This engine must not exist. However, Castiglioni wanted to see it in action, and Negroni, with the cunning of an old fox, hastily bolted a frame together to test the engine under real conditions. It was February. It was cold, but the Morini was running great. The power-to-weight ratio was enviable. It could have held its own even in a race. But the test remained clandestine, with no follow-up. With hindsight, it's easy to say that scrapping the Morini 4-valve engine was a colossal mistake. The Ducati 750, with 10 horsepower less and a price a million lire higher, wouldn't have stood a chance. With shell castings, the weight would have dropped below 50 kilograms. It ran entirely on plain bearings, with Mondial cast pistons. No magic tricks, just solid engineering, Lambertini recalled. If given the chance, 100 horsepower would have been within reach. But there was no room to dream. A real shame. That was how Lambertini remembered that moment. But history, as we know, is not always kind to visionaries. At the helm of the company were no longer men devoted to the art of engineering, but rather emissaries of the Cagiva group. And here lies the real issue. Cagiva, now in control of Morini's fate, feared creating a competitor in-house before even finalizing the acquisition. Why bet on an agile, modern, and efficient motorcycle when they could cling to the old power structures? Lambertini, however, was not one to give up. With an almost epic level of dedication, he laid out the numbers before management. The bike could be produced using existing factory machinery, and industrialization would cost 430 million lire, less than a nice apartment. And if the issue was the engine cost, he had the answer. 1,200,000 lire per unit, compared to the 2,300,000 lire for Ducati's 750. A slap in the face. The ending was bitter, as often happens with great untold stories. Management refused to budge, the project died before it was even born, and Lambertini, with bitterness in his heart and a sense of deep disappointment, left Moto Morini. A chapter closed, but with the unmistakable aftertaste of missed opportunities and talent sacrificed on the altar of industrial politics. Meanwhile, in Morini, 1988 saw the birth of the unlikely Dart 350, a truly clumsy attempt to Cagivize, a historic brand like Morini. It was a blatant mistake that seriously called into question the competence and motorcycle culture of the new Varese management. Bitterly, we can say that the motorcyclists of the time knew far more about motorcycles than the people producing them. The Dart 350 was an utter flop, more expensive and less performant than the competition. By 1989, it was clear to everyone that Cagiva, which had fully acquired Morini in 1987, had no intention of continuing any new projects within Morini. In fact, they seemed quite happy to eliminate a potential competitor that came with a twin-cylinder engine which, in terms of history and market success, could pose a threat to Ducati's prized engine designed by engineer Castiglioni. Sensing the downfall of his beloved Morini, Lambertini set his sights on new horizons. Piaggio, which had been courting him for some time, welcomed him as head of the engine design department. He developed engines for scooters ranging from 50 to 150 cc in both 2- and 4-stroke versions, air and water-cooled. But not just small displacements. Under his supervision, the powerful 1000 cc twin-cylinder engine was also created, only to be sacrificed on the altar of marketing. But his contribution went far beyond designing new engines. He trained an entire generation of engineers, passing on his knowledge with the generosity of someone who understands that talent, without successors, is like a river that runs dry. In 1995, thanks to his all-around expertise, he became the manager of the engine platform, a new organizational system that reduced the time required to bring engines into production. It operated across all major company functions, a management-heavy job where ingenuity and experience were crucial to meeting corporate deadlines. Then, like an old wolf who knows every trail in the forest, in 1997, he returned to his roots. Franco Morini Motori, founded by Alfonso Morini's nephew, where he took on the role of technical director, completely restructuring the design and development department. There, he designed and developed a series of 2- and 4-stroke engines. During this period, Maurizio Morini, great-grandson of Alfonso, nurtured the idea of bringing the brand back into the family. Indeed, Morini was acquired by Franco Morini SPA and was reborn in 2003 under the official name Moto Morini SPA. For once, it seemed that time was not moving forward but turning back. Franco Lambertini once again demonstrated his mastery in engine design. He got back in the saddle with the same wisdom of someone who doesn't just build engines but conceives them with both heart and mind. Whether Morini called him back or he, impatient to get back to work, knocked on the door doesn't really matter. Anyone who knows Lambertini knows that some passions stick to you like grease on a real mechanic's hands. And so, there he was again, with a load-bearing engine, a solution first seen in 1986 and brought back with the same clarity. But that wasn't all. The most observant noticed that drive sprocket positioned up high, almost challenging logic. Some wrote that it was for compactness, which was true. But the real reason was something nobler, reducing the chain pull effect on the swing arm, creating a more neutral, precise, and genuine chassis. What mattered was the result, and that was a masterpiece. A 1,200 cc V-twin capable of unleashing 140 horsepower at 8,500 RPM, enough to take the breath away from anyone who loves beauty and craftsmanship. This engine was later adapted for aviation use at ICP in Castelnuovo Don Bosco. Now, whether Lambertini was officially retired or not was a trivial matter. What mattered was that when needed, he was there. And if once the old Morini didn't have to deal with Euro 3 regulations, today that challenge was inescapable. But the master didn't flinch. He took the problem, analyzed it, dissected it, and solved it. The result? An engine that delivered power consistently without hesitation with 123 nanometers of torque at 6,500 revolutions per minute. Others, no names needed, had accustomed us to power delivery gaps so obvious they almost seemed inevitable. But Lambertini proved that limitations exist only for those who don't dare to push beyond them. Men like Franco Lambertini are the artisans of speed, the artists of steel, the poets of the roar. And like the motorcycles they created, they continue to race in the hearts of those who knew them. History doesn't always reward visionaries, but time does. Today, looking back, it's impossible not to wonder what could have been if the courage of ingenuity had prevailed over industrial short-sightedness. Not all motorcycles make it to production, but those born from genius never truly die. They remain in the dreams of those who conceived them, in the envy of those who stopped them, and in the regret of those who would have loved to ride them. Destiny may have silenced the roar of some engines, but it can never erase the audacity of those who dared to create them. Because true ideas, the ones destined to make history, don't need a verdict. They keep on racing, forever. We stop here, but the road of legends continues, and the wheels keep turning. The stories remain. Each person tells a journey and unveils an era. Until the next stop, always on two wheels with another piece of history to tell.